You think it's lust, but what if it's the oldest scar on your soul, still bleeding quietly, still trying to feel whole again? You meet them, and something happens. Not in your mind, in your body. A pull, a burn, like gravity itself has twisted just to align you two. You don't even know them, not really, but suddenly you're laughing too loud at their jokes. You're staring too long. You're touching without reason. It's like your skin knows them, even if your memory doesn't. There's no logic here, no checklist of traits. You don't care if they're good for you. You're not looking for good. You're looking for something else. Something raw, something that makes you feel alive, or maybe less dead. One night you give in. Maybe it's the first night, or the 100th time you've sworn you wouldn't. The moment is heat and chaos and breathlessness. It feels like ecstasy. But when it's over, a strange silence sets in. Not around you, inside you. You stare at the ceiling, or the bathroom mirror, or your unread messages. And there it is, the ache. You can't explain why it hurts. You got what you wanted, didn't you? So why does it feel like you lost something? This is where most people stop thinking. They blame the other person, or themselves. They call it bad luck, toxic patterns, or just how love goes. But this isn't love, and maybe it's not even lust. What if what you call desire is actually a wound? What if the person you're chasing isn't your future, but your past? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So many of us are living out an invisible script, a compulsion to repeat, not because we want to, but because the wound never healed. What if the obsession you're calling love is actually your inner child begging not to be abandoned again? It sounds heavy, but there's freedom in naming it. Keep watching. We'll walk through how self-awareness transforms compulsion into healing. The wound behind the want. It starts earlier than you think. Before your first crush, before your first kiss, before your first heartbreak. The real story of your desire was already being written when you were small, soft, and entirely dependent. Back then, love wasn't a choice, it was survival. And when the people you needed most didn't show up the way you needed them to, something inside you broke. Not loudly, quietly, in a way you couldn't even name. Maybe it was a parent who only loved you when you were perfect. Maybe it was the silence after a scream. Maybe it was being told you were too much, or never enough. You adapted. You learned to read a room before you could read a book. You learned to shrink, to please, to disappear. You learned that love was earned, not given. And now, you're still chasing, but it doesn't look like childhood anymore. It looks like a sudden obsession, a magnetic pull towards someone who mirrors something familiar. Not comforting, but familiar. You call it chemistry, you call it lust, but it's older than that. It's the body remembering what the mind tried to forget. Carl Jung called this the wounded psyche, the hidden damage left by emotional neglect, abandonment, or unmet needs. It doesn't disappear with time. It burrows deep into your unconscious, quietly shaping your desires. And it doesn't whisper in words. It speaks through patterns. So you fall for people who ignore you, because that's how love felt as a child. You crave intensity, not stability, because calm feels foreign. You confuse attention with affection. You think about them all the time, not because they're special, but because they triggered the part of you still waiting to be chosen. You don't want them. You want the version of you they make you feel, desirable, worthy, needed. This isn't about lust, it's about hunger, not for sex, for connection, for healing, for someone to finally make you feel what your caregivers couldn't, seen, safe, understood. But here's the cruel twist. When that kind of emotional hunger goes unhealed, it doesn't make you wise. It makes you vulnerable. You start mistaking pain for passion. You call it sparks when it's really trauma meeting trauma. You get addicted to the chase because the chase feels like home. What if your lust isn't a sign of freedom, but of captivity? What if the people you obsess over aren't the problem, but the mirror? What if every ache, every craving, every time you felt you'd die without them, was just the wound resurfacing. You weren't looking for a lover. You were looking for a mother, a father, a childhood you never got. And now in adult bodies and broken patterns, you're trying to rewrite the past. Not because you're broken, but because you were never taught another way to be whole. Lust is easy to name, but the wound, that takes work to recognize, and even more to heal. The psyche's projection. Trap. You say it's just your type. You like the mysterious ones, the ones who pull you close then disappear, the ones who never say too much, who keep you guessing. You chase them through half-texts and cold silences, convincing yourself it's the thrill, that this is what desire feels like. But deep down, it's not thrilling. It's exhausting. Still, you return again and again. Different faces, same story. You tell yourself the next one will be different, that this one gets you, but somehow it always ends the same, with you staring at your phone, wondering what you did wrong, wondering why it always feels like loving them means losing yourself. Carl Jung had a name for this cycle: projection. It's the unconscious act of casting parts of ourselves, especially the wounded parts, onto other people. You don't just fall for someone randomly. You fall for the person who reflects back your unfinished business, who awakens something familiar in your nervous system. You think it's chemistry, but often it's recognition. The body remembers patterns even the brain forgets. So when someone makes you feel like your parent did, distant, critical, unpredictable, it doesn't run, it leans in. Not because it feels good, but because it feels known. The subconscious doesn't crave joy, it craves familiarity, even if that familiarity is painful, especially if it's painful, because some part of you still believes, if I can win this time, maybe I can heal what happened last time. So you recreate the scene of the wound. You play it out in real time, falling for people who can't love you, trying to be enough for someone who keeps slipping through your fingers, hoping that if you can finally make it work, the original wound will disappear. But it never works, because it's not about them. It never was. They're just placeholders, symbols, mirrors. The real work isn't changing who you love. It's understanding why you love the people who hurt you. It's facing the truth. You weren't seeking love. You were seeking redemption. You weren't addicted to the person. You were addicted to the fantasy of finally being chosen. But no one can give you what your inner child needed, except you. Projection blinds you to this. It convinces you the problem is outside, that if you just find the right person, everything will finally feel okay. But what you're really chasing is yourself. And until you stop looking outward, the pattern will continue. New name, new face, same wound, same ending. Modern lust and emotional bait. You open the app, a flood of faces, smiles curated for the camera, bios trimmed down to a few words. Swipe, swipe, swipe. You don't know what you're looking for, but you keep scrolling, hoping one more swipe might lead to something real, or at least something that makes you feel wanted for a moment. We live in a world engineered for stimulation. Every scroll, every click, every notification is designed to hit the dopamine center of your brain. But fulfillment, that's not the goal. The system isn't built for wholeness. It's built for craving. Desire has become the product, and you've become the user. Dating apps promise connection, but what they deliver is a loop. Constant validation mixed with constant emptiness. You match, you flirt, you ghost or get ghosted. And when it's all over, you're still alone, only now with a heavier heart and a shorter attention span. We've been sold the idea that lust is liberation, that to want endlessly is a form of power, that detachment is strength. But look closer and you'll see something else. Underneath the hyper-sexualized media, the Instagram thirst traps, the TikTok trends that turn bodies into algorithms, there's a wound being sold to us. A wound that says you are not enough unless you are wanted. Porn tells you pleasure is a solo performance. Ads tell you confidence comes in a bottle, a body, a brand. Movies tell you that obsession is love. And in all of it, no one teaches you how to actually feel. We're not hungry for sex. We're starving for meaning. But meaning takes effort. It takes slowing down. It takes presence. And in an age of instant gratification, presence feels like a threat. It forces you to sit with your loneliness, your shame, your longing. So we do the opposite. We sedate ourselves with more lust, more clicks, more people who don't know us and never will. Lust becomes emotional anesthesia. It numbs the ache of being unseen. It feels like freedom, like choice, like rebellion. But it's just a prettier form of bondage. We've mistaken being wanted for being loved. We've confused attention with intimacy. And the cost? A generation that knows how to perform desire, but not how to receive care. A culture obsessed with sex but afraid of softness. A world where everyone's exposed, but no one's truly known. So ask yourself, honestly, when was the last time someone really saw you? Not your filtered photos, not your flirty texts, but you, in your quiet, in your mess, in your humanity, because until you crave that more than the high of being wanted, you'll keep waking up next to strangers, wondering why the emptiness still follows you home. The shadow and the seduction of pain. There are parts of you you've never met, parts you've pushed down, buried, denied. The rage, the neediness, the shame, the jealousy, the desperation, the craving for love that once made you feel pathetic, the tears that were never safe to cry, the screams you swallowed whole. Carl Jung called this hidden territory the shadow, the unconscious realm where all the pieces of you that didn't feel acceptable were exiled. Not because you're evil, but because you learned somewhere along the way that certain emotions made you unlovable. That being too much or too emotional or too vulnerable would cost you connection. So you became who the world needed you to be. Polished, controlled, desirable. You trimmed the edges, wore the smile, numbed the ache. But the shadow never left. It waited. And it waits still. Not with fangs, not with fire, but with a whisper, feel this again. You know this pain. It's yours. When the shadow isn't acknowledged, it doesn't disappear. It leaks through obsession, through patterns that destroy you, through toxic attraction disguised as romance, through lust that feels like love, but always ends in loneliness. That's why sometimes you fall the hardest for the people who hurt you most. You aren't falling in love. You're falling into the grave you dug for your younger self. Because pain is familiar. It's twisted, but it feels like home. The person who ignores you reminds you of the parent who did the same. The one who withdraws when you need closeness echoes the first time you were told your emotions were too much. And the part of you that still carries that wound, it doesn't want to let go. It wants to win, to finally be chosen, to finally rewrite the ending. But the shadow doesn't deal in endings, only repetition. And so you return to the flame, again and again, pretending it's warmth when it's really just fire. Lust becomes a way to self-destruct beautifully, to disguise your pain and pleasure, to burn without admitting you're bleeding. It's not just about the other person, it's about you confronting the darkness you were never allowed to feel. Because here's the truth, the shadow is seductive. Not because it offers joy, but because it offers recognition. It says, you know this feeling. You've been here before. Let's go deeper. But the deeper you go without awareness, the more you disappear into the very parts of yourself you tried so hard to escape. And until you turn around and face the shadow, you will keep loving people who don't love you back. You will keep calling pain a passion, and you will keep mistaking your wound for your worth. Facing the mirror. When lust is a cry, what if it was never about them? Not their body, not their smile, not the way they made you feel for a few electric seconds. Strip all of that away, and what's left? You, standing alone with a hunger that no one else can fill. This is where most people run, into another text thread, another night out, another moment of pretending they're okay, as long as someone desires them. But what if you didn't run this time? What if you pause long enough to ask the question you've avoided for years? Why do I want this so badly? Because the truth is, you didn't want their body. You wanted to feel enough. You wanted someone to see you and stay. You wanted someone to choose you when you weren't perfect, when you weren't pretty, when you weren't performing. Lust was just the mask. The real cry came from deeper. It came from the child inside you still waiting at the door, still watching the people they loved walk away, still thinking, if I were more beautiful, more fun, more lovable, they'd stay this time. But they didn't. And now every time you feel that ache, you go searching. Not for them, but for you, for the version of yourself that never got to feel whole. It takes courage to admit that, to stop blaming the other person for not being what you needed, to realize you were never chasing them, you were chasing a lost piece of yourself. It takes strength to sit with the wound, to not sedate it through fantasy or flesh, to look it in the eyes and say, I see you, I'm not running anymore. Lust can be a cry, but it doesn't have to be the answer, because real healing begins when you stop reaching outward and turn your hand inward, toward the version of you that's still waiting to be told, you don't need to earn love, you are already enough. And that kind of love, real, quiet, patient, only happens when you stop seeking it in others and finally offer it to yourself. Real intimacy versus the addictive. High lust is loud, it races, it burns fast, then leaves you empty. It gives you the illusion of connection, the high of being wanted, the temporary fix for a deeper ache. But real intimacy, it whispers, it waits, it doesn't demand, it asks. It asks for your presence when there's no reward. It asks for your patience when everything in you wants to flee. It asks you to stay, not when it's exciting, but when it's quiet. Lust gives you a rush. Intimacy gives you roots. But here's the twist. Most people run from real intimacy, not because they don't want it, but because they don't recognize it. Love that doesn't spike your heart rate feels unfamiliar. Stable affection feels boring compared to the emotional roller coaster of chasing someone who doesn't want you back. But what if boredom isn't a lack of love, but the presence of peace? What if the calm, the stillness, the reliability you once called dull was actually the kind of safety your nervous system never learned to trust? We crave chaos because it feels like home. But home was never supposed to be a place of survival. It was supposed to be a place of rest. So the question becomes, are you brave enough to love without adrenaline? To sit with someone who doesn't trigger your wounds, but sees you as you are? To build something steady in a world that teaches you to chase? Because anyone can burn for a moment, but it takes a different kind of courage to be the flame that never goes out. Heal the wound, end the hunger. There is a way out, not a perfect ending, not a Hollywood redemption arc, but something quieter, something real. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And for many of us, fate has looked a lot like repetition, like heartbreak disguised as passion, like wounds dressed up as desire, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Healing begins when you stop confusing intensity for intimacy. When you stop believing that the person who leaves you breathless must be the one who makes you whole. When you finally admit that maybe the pain wasn't passion after all, it was just pain. This is where the work begins. Not in someone else's arms, but in your own solitude. In the stillness you once feared. In the questions you never let yourself ask. It begins with therapy, with journaling, with long, uncomfortable silences where you let the truth surface without running from it. You don't heal by finding the perfect partner. You heal by becoming the person your younger self needed. The one who says, I see you, I'm not leaving. You don't have to perform to be loved. You don't have to chase to feel worthy. Because lust will fade. The thrill will pass. The high will crash. But wholeness, that's something you carry with you. Into every room, every relationship, every moment of your life. And once you have that, you stop searching for someone to complete you because you finally remember you were never broken, only buried. And now you're ready to come home. Lust was never the enemy. It was the messenger, the signal fire, the language your soul used when it couldn't speak in words. It pointed to the hunger, the absence, the ache. Not so you'd chase it blindly, but so you'd finally turn inward and ask, what have I been running from? So now, pause, rewatch, reflect, reconnect with what you buried to survive. Not because it's easy, but because it's the only way home. Lust was never the problem, it was the alarm clock. Your desire wasn't weakness. It was your inner child screaming for love. So honor that. Don't numb it, don't shame it. Like this if you're ready to meet yourself without the mask. Subscribe and come back to the parts of you that always deserve better. Comment down your thoughts or experience. Your honesty could light the way for someone else.